Mrs. Stew, back in the day with Geoff, and Geoff's journalist, musician. Geoff and Iggy is actually here. Geoff's dog, Iggy Pup. How's it going, Geoff?
I'm good, Stu. How are you, mate?
Yeah, not too bad. And how's it going, Iggy Pup? Chomp, chomp, chomp down there on his
Yeah,
lead.
she's chewing the lead up.
Her lead.
She wants freedom.
Okay, so Geoff's a journalist, a regional, small, independent publication, weekly. I don't know. We might as well start there. Like, how long have you been doing that for?
I work for a small independent newspaper where I've basically been given a bit of free rein to do what I do.
And how long's that been going on for?
15 years.
15.
I've been working here now, and it's an interesting position to hold.
So, over the course of that 15 years, how have the sort of dynamics of the way that you do your job changed? I guess probably largely on account of technology and other things, the way that society's changed, maybe.
Well, first I'd like to talk about my role in the community, working for a community-based newspaper, an independent newspaper. It's a bit of a privilege. I meet all kinds of people and I get to tell all kinds of stories, from the local knitting group through to investigating local government or state, sometimes federal government issues, through to writing about entertainment. But one of the great joys for me is that I can ask people questions and tell their stories. It's a privilege because people trust me with what they tell me, and I make the decision to not breach that trust. So far, so good. One of the most important roles of being a journalist, in my view, is the role you play in democracy. Now, in a small area like ours, and any other area for that matter, the most important government is the local government, because the local government is the closest government to the people. It's the form of government where people have the most say and the opportunity to have a bigger say than any other government. However, that's something that's not widely reported on a national basis. So it's important for democracy, because if there's nobody keeping an eye on what that local government's doing, both at the operational and the political level, well, then complacency can set in, and what might not be proper process can become accepted as normal.
We're seeing that happen on various levels throughout the world, just about every...
The same thing's happening in the building industry, which has come to the fore lately, with towers burning down and cracks happening and multi-million-dollar developments being built on contaminated ground. It's all to do with the privatisation, which is actually one of the things that's actually affecting journalism, is the idea of privatising what used to be government utilities and corporatising services such as public works, liquor and gambling, electricity. All of these kind of moves by governments, they interfere with the journalistic practice because of the commercial in confidence idea. So transparency becomes more like opaqueness. That's one of my greatest frustrations. This, combined with the digitisation of the media and also with social media, these two aspects have combined to separate or reduce the opportunity for people to be more objective about how they might come by their judgments.
So when you started at the publication, did you envisage it becoming like this digitally? That's the way that it's become, where people kind of aren't paying for news, where various organisations are just lifting news from each other's websites.
Well, I wouldn't say that I had perceived it directly. However, when I was a mature age student in 1993 at Southern Cross University studying music industry, we spoke then about what was happening in China in particular, because it was kind of emulating the music industry. That is, record companies, for instance, start up independently, expose somebody, and a bigger record company buys it. With the China issue, Guangdong province had just been opened up to capitalism.
Sorry, what year did you say again?
93.
93. Okay.
To capitalism. And as first-year students, I was a mature-age student, of course, we discussed that idea about where that might lead to. And basically where it led to is where we are now. And that was kind of the consensus at the time, that whilst China is a communist country, it would take capitalism and exploit it and use it for its own purposes, which is one of the issues that we're happening now. So to bring that back into the digital domain, the other thing that was being discussed, that was interesting, it was really the birth of the internet at that point in time, where Napster was pretty big, with sharing free music and programs, and the other big thing in those days was chat rooms. So that was like the beginning of the socialisation of the internet. So I was always amazed by the gee whiz factor by the younger people there, but the idea that the internet would be a form of anarchy was very popular among the younger students. And of course, that is how the internet evolved, ironically, given it was started by the US military. And that anarchy has followed through to the point where we now have Spotify replacing Napster as a corporate entity where we can get all the music we want. And
it's like corporatized anarchy in a lot of ways.
Well,
I might actually just adjust your mic a bit so we're sort of looking at each other.
So the corporatized anarchy, maybe more so that corporations have a habit of one of my favourite acoustic punk musician, Patrick Fitzgerald, once said, "Make it safe, get your bondage trousers at Woolworths," which was which was a true reflection of what was happening in that respect. And that's how the record industry works. These themes are common. So we get to the digital issue with the internet. So because there was an expectation among people use it that everything on the internet was free because of its anarchic kind of premise, it became difficult, in my view at least, for the corporations to rein it in. However, we now know that Google and Facebook and their ancillaries are now the major players, and to the point where they're being held up as having a monopoly and maybe being fined large amounts of money. So how does this all play into the mediascape? Well, as Facebook has expanded and newspapers have had to get rid of their journalists, they've had to narrow the demographics to which they appeal, whether they be ideological demographics, political demographics, or age demographics. So the media has become more polarised. So media like The Australian spends thousands of words each week supporting conservative ideas. The Guardian does something similar with, some might call it PC or left-leaning ideas. And then there's all the rhetoric around it. Now, people don't like paying subscriptions to newspapers. So they'll get it free however they can.
They don't mind buying it each day, though.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things. It's how, when behaviours change like this, I can't explain it. But so, and when we make our friend groups on Facebook, some of us collect friends for the point of having a number of friends because it's a competition, but others will keep their friend groups to people with similar views.
Yeah.
Now, when you have people working together with similar views, then they're sharing media stories. So they end up magnifying what the media itself has done.
They're all contributing to each other's algorithm.
Yeah. So the media has already decided for us to survive, for parts of the media, we have to narrow our focus, a bit like how magazines were. So it's filtered down in that way, so people aren't exposed to the same ideas like they used to be if they were daily newspaper readers, where there might be 10 stories on a page, and you might read the first paragraph of 8 of them. 6 you might read because you're interested, but 2 of them might have, because they're well written, might have got you thinking about something from a different perspective and perhaps enlightened you as a reader. A lot of that's been taken away now, right across those scopes, in my view, and the reality is, though, at the corporate and the commercial and the consumerist level, the big players, the ones that hold all the data, they also hold the power, and that's been played out now globally. So I've gone a long way off the original question, Stu, but it's all relevant because it plays on your employers' minds how to grapple with this, because revenue streams, say for the newspaper I work for, are probably a third of what they once were. So each week's a struggle just to survive. So in my role as a journalist, I've been in that privileged position for the last 15 years, working across all those genres, telling people stories. I've met amazing people. People have had people like Ian Gaillard who've had a global effect. People like
did you go on like one of the Sea Shepherd?
Yeah,
boats?
Going on the Sea Shepherd. Yeah, that was an interesting thing because I, whilst I was on there for an hour and a bit, I met all these people who were genuine. They were there for a reason, and I got 3 people to tell me their own personal stories and ask them specific questions, and it was quite interesting. They certainly didn't fall into Andrew Bolt's description of these kinds of people.
Yeah.
I guess that's it.
So, as far as look, when we built this radio station here that we're sitting in recording this, we were like, wow, how are we going to deal with MP3s? Like, how do we do that? And like within two or 3 years, it was like we've come in and seen Spotify on the desktop of the computer. I was like, what the hell is this Spotify? It's like we just didn't. It didn't even tweak with us.
Are you allowed to use Spotify?
No. So it was like, no, everybody, you can't use Spotify. But it didn't exist when we first started. And then all of a sudden it became like we had some younger crew come on board and like who just basically picked up on Spotify straight away. And they just thought, yeah, no worries. And it's like, no, you can't do that. Like, but the concept of us not of us having to tell anybody, hey, you can't stream when we first started, like was just so far beyond what we considered might happen in the future. We just had all we could see is what will happen if if people keep on bringing in sticks, we'll just end up with all this so much music. What are the legal ramifications of that? We didn't have any clue that further down the track, hey, there would be this medium and it was only 2 or 3 years. Like, I mean, we started this in 2011. And yeah, it was probably within 2 or 3 years of us starting. It was like, what's this Spotify thing that was on the desk? Might have even been less. Might have even been like in the first 12 months. Like, but
apparently, it still hasn't turned a profit yet. But
I mean, look. If you look at what the history of recorded music is, recorded music was initially singles, like popular culture recorded music post 78s. Okay, so we're looking at after 78s, they bought out 45s, and 45s were promotional items for artists that were going to be playing in various places, and they sold for a nominal fee. It was all to get people to go to the person's concert. Beyond a certain point, they realized, wow, we could put a whole bunch of these together, similar formats, slow down the speed and fit like 10 tracks on one piece of vinyl, which became the album. And then people started to specifically record albums. But the way I see these, like, music's getting back to its essence of what it is, and that's an art form as opposed to a money-making venture for the artists. Like, music's getting back to what it was from the artist's point of view. But people know, the young people that play that are getting into the music industry and becoming musicians now know that if they want to make income, they've got to play. They're not going to be able to, like, recording isn't going to be their primary source of income. They're getting into the industry knowing that this is how it is. It's as it's always been, even with regards to sharing of music and whether or not it should be paid for or whatever. It's the older artists who rely on the sales of their back catalogue to keep their income coming.
They're relying on plays on radio stations.
Plays on radio stations. I mean, plays.
But they're not.
Was it like Mariah Carey, like, for that song "All I Want for Christmas Is You"? Like, it got played so many tens of millions or hundreds of millions of times. I can't remember exactly what it was on Spotify. We could probably look it up right here on the phone.
Well, it's not.
And she got paid sweet fuck all.
Yeah,
like for the millions and millions of plays that it got. But
it takes 5,000 plays to earn what you would have earned for selling one single, I think.
Okay,
something like that.
Wow. But I don't know. Like, there was a time where I was like, "Oh, modern music is shit." I didn't really know where to look for it, and now I've sort of kind of come up with concepts of good ways of looking for it using the internet, obviously. The difficult part is sorting through it all. To me, there seems like there's so much more music than what there used to be, and there's access to so many more diverse sounds and genres of music than what there ever has been.
Well, see, this is again where journalism came in. It was journalists who fostered musical movements. It was journalists who told people about what was good.
Yeah.
You know, when the punk thing happened in the UK, it was journalists like Carolyn Coon, Alan Jones, what's the other fella? The other main player?
The guy that was the guy
Nick Kent. So
yeah, and then there was also the journalist that was the subject of that started Factory Records.
Yeah, but that's some time after. I can't remember.
No, because he was all part of that first bunch of people that saw the Pistols. He saw him in Manchester.
Yeah, I'm talking about before the Pistols. I'm talking about what came out of New York. That's where punk started.
Sorry, you said UK.
Yeah, I know that. That's where it became popular. But punk started in New York.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Obviously what was happening there, but then obviously the Ramones were the first kind of thing ascertained. And there's a bit of bullshit about Patti Smith being a punk, but that's rubbish in my view. But anyway, that's another story.
So where do you put Iggy?
Iggy,
given that your dog's named after.
He was a progenitor of it, basically because he was. I mean, but there were people before him. I mean, John Lennon was probably one of the very first rock punks.
What about Jim Morrison?
Don't know about him in that respect, whether you'd call him a punk or not. Okay. The reason I would call John Lennon a punk was simply because so you probably could, but Jimmy he had an FU attitude, but he played the game like every punk musician has who's ever done a recording and signed with a record company. You can't get away with it. I mean, that's what made the Clash such an enigma, because they were so conflicted about it. But in the end, they were happy to beat their chest about being the biggest rock band in the world when they could hardly play, really. But I love their music because it's about what you said. So basically, back to the journalist side of things. So these guys, particularly Alan Jones and Nick Kent, were gonzo-style journalists. They went on the road with the bands. They took drugs with them. They had sex with them or alongside them. And they drank with them. And they wrote their stories. They got beaten up by them. When Tony Iommi, beat Alan Jones up, Alan Jones still had to go back and do another interview with him when he didn't get beaten up. Or when David Bowie in New York was with Lou Reed in New York and Alan Jones has come in, he was friendly with both of them. He sat down. David Bowie said something that Lou Reed didn't like. Lou Reed smashed him. I told you not to say that. Don't say that. David Bowie said it again. So Lou Reed smashed him again and then left. So it was Alan Jones and David Bowie. Alan Jones said something he didn't like, and so David Bowie smashed Alan Jones. But these guys were writing about this stuff, about the bad behaviour. That's always happened in rock and roll all through the 60s. And
50s, like.
And that too. But if we come into Australia, obviously we had Molly Meldrum, who's the most apparent one. But for me, the most important writer in Australian music history, at least with the 80s pub scene, was Anthony O'Grady, who edited Rock Australia magazine. Okay. That's where I got all my information from.
Yep,
I bought it every week. I knew what was happening in the UK. I even won a Graham Parker in the Rumour Live at the Marble Arch record. Apparently there was only meant to be 500 copies ever made.
Oh, wow.
Came in a plain sleeve with a stamp on it. He passed away recently with hardly any acknowledgement.
God.
But Rock Australia magazine, because obviously there was the one in Melbourne. But
Ram. Rock Australia, man. Like, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, okay, like,
nearly all the great biography writers, like
Iggy Pup,
Stafford and Stuart Koo and all this. That's where they were writing.
Yeah,
these guys, proper journalist standard writers.
Yeah,
that made when the bands like Cold Chisel or Angels were paying to 100 or 300 people at the Trade Union Club in Sydney. How did we find out about that? How come they got out? It's because these people were writing about it, and a small crew, and then the word would go out. I mean, Cold Chisel were still broke after they'd had number ones. They were still living out of their bloody van.
Yeah, right. So when was that? Like late 70s?
No, in the 80s.
In the 80s,
thing, yeah.
Like
I suppose it came out of the late 70s, obviously. That was all part of the new wave kind of idea.
Yeah.
The post-punk thing. And wasn't so much of a fashion in Australia, but there was a fashion, I think. Obviously, Melbourne had a bit going on down there with the Godinsky and setting up and signing up the Boys Next Door, Nick Cave, and a few others. And, of course, some of those bands went on to have careers, the Models, things, bits and pieces like that.
Yeah, okay. So, see, I guess, like, I was a kid becoming a teenager in those years, so for me the first sort of insight was more the free street press, like going into the nearest town with my friends, and which was inevitably was Parramatta, and we'd go on the bus, we'd hang out at the shops, go and check out the music shop, and then there's like, oh, what's this? And pick it up, and it's like it was on the street.
The street press was really important, but it was like a dumbed down version of Rock Australia magazine.
Well, that's
like Drum Media. I'd subscribed to Drum Media right into the 90s.
Yeah,
when Rock Australia magazine wasn't published, I'd get it posted to me.
Well, see, that's when after a while, it was like, oh wow, they also sell these magazines, and then, like, as kids, it was like once we got the money and once we sort of got disposable enough income that we could. Yeah, let's buy rock, and got into music enough to want to buy a rock magazine as opposed to maybe a BMX magazine or something like that was around at the time. But yeah, it was on that street mag level that I kind of.
The good thing for me about Rock Australia magazine, I used to read the Rolling Stone and New Musical Express, so they were the three things I wrote.
Yeah, that
covered all the music I was interested in. So, I'm a bit of a vicarious person. Most of my life just lived in my brain. So when you read stories like, Iggy Pup, for instance, playing a gig in Germany when he was reinvigorating his career with The Idiot, and no one taking any notice of him, and then doing a swan dive and wiping out the table where the people in suits and dresses were dining and just smashing everything to get their attention. That connected with me. I don't know why. I'm not that kind of person. But, darkness has always been a big part of rock and roll. And another story which I read in Ram magazine was about the scientists who came over from Western Australia.
Yep.
And they're playing a gig in Sydney, and no one was taking any notice. So they smashed their stuff up. It's a cliche, but they got noticed.
Yeah, right.
Iggy Pop, I once saw Iggy Pop asked, why do you take your penis out when you're doing a gig sometimes? And he said, well, if the crowd aren't reacting the way I want them to react, I'll just take my cock out. And after that,
they're
in my hand. Now a lot of people think Iggy Pop is just a drug-crazed lunatic, particularly if they saw the Countdown one with Molly Meldrum doing I'm Bored. That had to be the most dangerous performance ever
on Countdown.
Like literally with the way through that stand around
And
all those 12 and 13-year-old girls.
Yeah, and you see as he's walking down the stage, like the kids are actually moving back from the stage.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, so I saw him interviewed once on a Tonight Show, an American Tonight Show, and he did his performance. I can't remember the song, but it was typical Iggy Pop.
Yep.
He was going nuts, carrying on. And he came back and he sat down and he was just like the guy that you saw in the Molly Meldon interview, you know, like picking flies off him, moving around like that. And the guys asked him this question. He can barely raise a proper answer. But then there was this transformation that happened. Iggy Pop, the lunatic, turned into Iggy Pop, the intellectual.
yeah, I think I've seen.
And this guy asked questions and Iggy Pop just made him look
Destroyed
like an
him.
idiot.
Yeah.
And it was like, and he explained to him, he said, well, I'm an entertainer. I've got to put a show on.
Yeah.
This is my show. But my show is my deep inner self. It's the zone I go into. These aren't Iggy's words, these are my words.
Yeah.
That's the zone I go into. And see that...
I think he's got a name for his stage character.
That's the ultimate thing. Ooh, Iggy Pop.
No,
James Osterberg's his name.
Yeah, no, but I think I think he's got a name for it that, like, he
Loco Mosquito? I don't know. But
I don't
look,
know.
anyway, the darkness in rock music, you know, it's almost an unexplained phenomenon. If we go through all the history of rock music, it's all to do with danger. When something new happens. When Elvis was there,
don't step on my blue suede
he was
shoes.
dangerous because
Yeah.
he was doing black music and moving like a black man. When Jim Morrison was doing what he was doing, it was about danger and darkness. When punk came along, it was about anger. Johnny Rotten said anger is energy, and it is. But he wasn't saying you should just be an anarchist, even though it appeared that way. He was saying that use that anger.
Yeah.
Do something useful with it. Because the political state in the UK was pretty dire at the time under Thatcher.
Margaret.
So, and then if we move on again to the Nirvana era or rap music, it was about darkness and danger because rap musicians were talking about their lives. So their art was talking about their lives, and that's where most contemporary music, rock music, that's what it's about most of the time. And then we come to the Nirvana issue, and again, a broken personality in Kurt Cobain, filled with darkness and physical pain, and yet he motivated the world because he connected with something that was happening among young people and probably older people too that's unexplainable, and it was exploited. And there we have the art, the paradox of making art. Art, what is art? How do we measure what's good art? John Lennon used to call his best art making times when he used to refer to it as an artistic depression. Now, but what is art? Well, it's making something from an idea, whatever that art might be, and anybody can do it. But in our commercial world of consumerism, we talk about art as a product, and it is. But that's how we give it value. But is that the right way to value art?
No.
Because
what is the, like, I mean...
Well, the key here for me is that the reason people make art or craft or anything that comes from an idea, that is a form of creation.
Well, up to a certain point, art didn't have any monetary value. It was done purely for either specific reasons or for I'm guessing, expression. Like,
well,
if you look at ancient rock art, and
yeah, but there was
like, it wasn't done to maintain a... Like, I mean, the idea of having to make a living is something surely that's only probably...
Look, it's an expression.
I mean, it's been around for much less time. The idea of having to make a living than what art has been around.
Like if I just talk about fine art or art that's done with brushes or whatever.
Yep.
The cliche is say, I could paint that when you see something,
a triangle, like
whatever. It's
yeah. Blue poles or something.
But somehow when you make art, whatever the idea is, some of that idea gets onto the canvas. Now, you just mentioned blue poles. Now, when that was bought, when Geoff Whitlam bought that, it was regarded as one of the, by sections of the community, as one of the stupidest decisions the government's ever made in the history of Australia. Now, obviously, that's proven to be wrong because monetarily, it's a highly valued piece of art now.
But that's how it's defined.
But you can stand in front of that even though you don't understand it and be overawed by it. But why were you overawed? After all, it was just a guy with a can of paint on a string, just making splashes while he drank alcohol and smoked cigarettes. But somehow it connected. He was a dark personality. Here we back
Jackson Pollock.
Yeah. So we're back to this darkness again. So it's an interesting part that I find interesting about humanity. So when you talk about anger being an energy, well, darkness is an energy, and it can be used for positive reasons, if only to give people something to connect to and feel like they're part of the world.
Yeah.
So that's, to me, that's the connection that comes when somebody exploits their anger or their darkness and makes art as a result, and it connects with millions of people. It gives those people a reason for being, even if they don't understand it.
That's got to be, though, the essence of joy, of the idea of that's like that essence of joy of from the artist's point of view of presenting their art and witnessing somebody connect to it has got to be like the true essence of or a truer essence of art than monetary value.
Well, I don't think it is. I think the essence is actually the making.
But when you do something I know when I do something and someone says, wow, that's really, really good, it's not part of the reason that I've done it, but it's part of the reward for having. Yeah,
it's certainly a reward. Our egos like to be rewarded. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean,
no.
Like when I said I'm a vicarious person, it means that I'm egocentric. That means that I'm always thinking about how I fit in with things. But
But that's all we've got. That's all anybody.
But it's not egotistical
like
because I'm as insecure as the next person. And of course, there are many great artists, whether they be performing or painting, who are always having internal struggles with both their superiority and their inferiority. Those two things. That's a paradox. That's an artistic paradox, because if somebody gets too egotistical, particularly in Australia, we judge them as being dickheads.
Yeah.
But we don't if they're egocentric, as long as they're not egotistical about it.
I guess.
So we get back to the art. So the doing to me is like important. So that justifies what you might call mediocre or poor art, because for that person, they felt good making it. So like my motivation to make music came out of being depressed, although I didn't know that was what it was at the time. And perhaps I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you now had I not decided in my mid-20s to take up making music. I initially started writing words. I thought, who cares about poems? I'm writing poems and I don't even like reading it. So I may as well try and do something useful. So, and then punk had been there, and it was, well, if the DIY idea about just make a noise is all you need to make a song, why don't I do that? So I have. And that's the motivation. You still got to deal with all those issues about, what does the audience want? Do they want to dance? Do they want to listen? How they judge me? We made the errors. It's like, well, that's just the nature of the beast. Still got to make the music, and the cliche is true. When you're sometimes when you're on the stage or whatever you're doing, you feel at home rather than alienated.
I can appreciate and relate to that. Like I find if I'm going to a party, I would much rather be, if I'm just at that party, I don't feel particularly socially comfortable. If I'm at that party and I'm DJing, no worries at all. Like it gives me.
There's a Jonah Lewis song which is a cliche. I think 1980 perhaps, maybe late 79. You'll always find me in the kitchen at parties, right? Even young people have heard that, even though it hardly ever gets played because it's, well, that's what that's about. So being the DJ, it's like being the centre of attention. So that's good. I remember I did some DJing in the 80s.
I much prefer collective attention rather than individuals focus one-on-one.
I did DJing in the 80s.
That's scary and intimidating.
I was unemployed. It was during that time when I was having my first major depression. And I was working at the patch at Coolangatta. And my first night up there, I took all my punk records, LPs. I didn't have singles, apart from a couple of local ones. And Joe Camilleri, well, Jojo Zepp and the Falcons, as he was called then, was the band on. And he came up to me with his single. He said, introduced himself, and he said, "Here's our single, Hit and Run. I'd really love it if you played it, maybe half a dozen times during the night tonight." I said, "Oh, okay." Anyway, I was about as nervous as one could be, having never done anything like that before. That is, be a DJ. I just wanted to share the music that I love with other people. And of course, there weren't any DJs playing punk music. They were, or punk and new wave for that matter. They were still playing George Thorogood or disco or whatever.
Okay.
Anyway, I didn't say a word on the microphone that night, but I played the music. And I did what Joe asked me to do. And he made a special effort after the gig, and he came up to me and said, "Mate, I can't believe the music you're playing here tonight. That's amazing. Congratulations." Gave me some heart to continue. And also, I wasn't a musician yet at that point.
Okay. Wow. At the patch, eh? Cool.
Oh, yes. I used to be the president of Kira Surf Riders, and we had no money. I decided I was going to put a gig on. I had all this free time. I'd been retrenched. Well, I'd been sacked from my job because I'd had chronic bronchitis and basically wasn't turning up for work or having to go home because I was generally ill. But anyway, I decided to put a show on, and I called it Long Live Punk.
So what year was this?
This would be 1980 or 79.
Okay.
Somewhere around there. I lived across the road from the patch in a rundown flat at Coolangatta. They used to put fluoro signs up the front. I thought, well, I can't afford to pay for the fluoro sign. Can you give me the boards? One of my mates gave me a bit of house paint. I wrote my own signs out, like 2 6-metre long signs. So they were really punk looking. And people are going, "You're an idiot. Who's going to come and see punk bands? And who are your bands?" Well, my bands. There was a band called Razor from Brisbane who had a song out called Shutdown Countdown. And it had actually been played on Countdown. So I don't know how, but I managed to contact them. So I made them the headlining act. And then there was another band from Lismore. It was a girl that I was friendly with at the time, put me on to. She was the only other punk rocker I knew. And there was a couple of others, actually. But she was the one that I was friends with. And they were called Adolescent Urge. So, Long Live Punk, Adolescent Urge, supporting Razor. Everyone said I'm an idiot. And on 4GG, the Gold Coast radio station, I just used the community announcements. Lo and behold, I packed the joint.
Wow.
And there'd been no one going to the patch. We made a mozza for the club, and the people who ran the joint said, "How the hell did you get these people here?" I just said, "Lucky, I guess." I just believed in it.
Yeah, wow. And was that...
And the guy from Razor, I can't remember his name, I do recall how he had a nervous trait of scrunching up his cord till it was just in nights. But in the middle of the stage at the Pats, there was a pole, and he did a lot of swinging on the pole. That's mostly what I remember. But he said, "Why did you even ask us to come and do this gig?" Because punk music in those days was basically played in halls in Brisbane. There was a band. I think there was the Leftovers, the Saints, Razor, and a couple other bands I can't remember.
I saw the Leftovers a couple of times.
And basically, that was it. So again, Rock Australia magazine.
Yeah, wow.
Without Rock Australia magazine, I couldn't have done that.
Iggy Pup.
Sit. Hey, it's just somebody. It's not your house.
Wow, I didn't know that about you. Like that night, you must have just been like, yes. Like when it was at its height and it was packed with people and the bar staff were run off their feet. You must have just been going, yes, I did it.
Yeah, well, and it was. I put on a cruise after that, but unfortunately, it got a bit crazy, and a lot of stuff got ripped off the walls in the toilets, so we didn't make any money on that. We made a little bit, but we had to fix up the ferry that I.
So with that, was there other things like that going on in that area, or is that why you got so many people there? Because there was people there that were into it, but nothing had really been on for them to go to. Or?
Well, a band called Foreplay, which was the band that Jeremy Oxley and Bill Bilson and his brother Peter, I think, called Foreplay, used to play at the Patch every Thursday night.
Okay.
And that's I used to go and see them because I was just across the road, and that's where I met that person that put me onto the Lismore band. But really, there was a band called Seven Ballerinas, and maybe a bit of an underground punk scene up in Southport, but basically that was it. But by that time, that was when I was playing by then.
Okay.
Again, in Queensland, you weren't allowed to actually play original music.
Weren't you?
Not really. But, well, that's what I had to do because I couldn't play covers, really, because I didn't have the ability. But so, and I formed a band called The Missing Stakes. I don't know how we got that name. Tell
me more about this rule in Queensland. Is this all like Bjelke-Petersen government type sort of?
I'll jump around in time a bit. No, basically, that's because what venues wanted, and that's how the agents had it stitched up. So there's a guy called Graham Hutchinson who ran entertainment. Yep, I'm jumping through to about 1986 now.
Okay.
86, 87. He ran pretty with the whole east coast of Queensland and Northern Territory. Now, during those, when I started in 1981, in those 5 years, I had several bands, and I actually hooked up with some pretty amazing musicians, far better than I could ever be or ever have been. But they liked the songs I wrote. But that also meant, particularly with bass players, that Mr. Hutchinson would sometimes contact the bass players because we'd sometimes go up and do a free gig, which he put on up at Bombay Rock at Surfers Paradise. And he would see my bass players and then say, "Oh, look, I'll pay you $500 a week to go on the road." And sometimes they went, sometimes they didn't. But anyway, at this point in time, there was a band comp on, and my band was pretty shit hot at that time. Well, the drummer was a bit so-so, but the other drummer, he had a car accident, got back majorly depressed and stopped drumming. We played this band comp at the Jet Club in Coolangatta. Probably, it went over a 3-month period, every week, all bands from all southeast Queensland. And we managed to get to the final, and there was this guy who used to work at the Harbour Agency. Now, I'd already been black banded by this stage. I have to go back in time. I got a bit out of track here. I recorded an album. My band broke up, and the guitar player and the drummer were still with me, and I recorded an album. I was pretty naive. I was working full-time. I recorded an album, released it on cassette. It was on top of the charts on the bulletin, although they were a faux chart, but nonetheless, it was up there. I made a bio, and I thought, well, I'm going to go and see these guys now. And so I made an appointment to see one of the managers at Hutchinson's at Surfers Paradise, and we sat down in his office, pushed the tape, and and the bio, 10-page bio with pictures and all that crap in it, across the desk, and then looking for work, and he pushed the top 40 across the desk to me and said, if you want to work for me, there's your set list. Well, I just said, can I say it?
Yeah.
I said, I just told him to get fucked and walked out. Okay, that was before the comp. So we're in this competition, and one of the judges was an ex-harbour agency who'd come up to live on the Gold Coast and was working with Hutcho, and he didn't know anything about me being black band at that level.
Yep.
All right. Anyway, he liked us, so we got through to the grand final. I did a bono on the grand final, though. My acoustic guitar didn't work, so I just pretended to play it. No one even noticed. But my guitar player, and he was pretty amazing.
Did you do like the full Archie's pretend?
One of the best.
Hand is standing
one
flat.
of the best guitar players I've ever heard, in my view. I just love what he did. Anyway, so we came fourth. Ironically, we beat a band called the Bossa Nova Kids, which was Mr. Hutchinson's favourite original band, who came fifth. But anyway, our fourth place gig prize, apart from some music equipment, was a year's worth of gigs, and we thought, we're set. Because, so what happens next? It's like, I'll get our first gig. And our first gig's at Inala, which is the western suburbs of Brisbane, and in those days, the roughest part of Brisbane. Now, I didn't have a problem with Inala. In fact, I used to go there, and my mechanic lived there, and I didn't have a personal problem. But having said that, that's what its reputation was. The western suburbs, the cliche. And my band we had three sets. We had we used to do a set of covers, like Psychedelic Furs, Crowded House, Simple Minds, and all that sort of stuff. And then we'd do a set of 60s songs, and we'd dress up. And the bass player loved this idea of dressing up. So we'd dress up. I had a crushed blue velvet suit. We all had black wigs that came down to our belly buttons and sunnies. And we only played one original song, which was Dance of the Cannibal, which is the song that I used to jump into the crowd with and carry on like a maniac, which was always pretty funny. But we played our first set, and that went okay, lukewarm. There's probably 100 or so people in the venue. But then we came out in our suits. They didn't like it. Now, it wasn't quite the Blues Brothers thing where we needed a cage to protect ourselves, but there were a few things thrown, nothing major. Anyway, and then we did our original set at the end, the Love Equals. That was the name of the band, Love Equals. The 60s band was called Atomic Popsicle.
So you had like a different name for each set, a different band name for each set.
So they didn't like that at all. That was the only gig Hutcho gave us.
Of your year's worth.
What a prick. Anyway, the story goes on after that. It's a bit of a tale of woe, but we played an Amnesty International show at the Patch, and the ABC sent a mobile down to record it. So we had our set recorded, got a bit of airplay from one of the songs off my album on the ABC, which didn't really amount to much, and they did a few outside broadcasts and interviews where they went to surfing comps and stuff like that. Anyway, when we played that, there was two people in the audience, and they come and saw us after and said, "Oh, look, we're looking for a band to manage." And we thought, "Yay, yay!" Because I had no idea what to do. I was pretty naive, and so they organised us this gig at the Miami High School, and a guaranteed crowd. Now, so we rock up there, and of course the school band is our support act.
Okay.
And so we rock up there, and like there's 1,000 people in the room. I was like, "Oh, this is going to be fantastic." We played to be 300 and 500 people at the playroom doing support acts there. This is going to be the best gig we've ever done. And they're going nuts for the school band. And they're okay, not a bad band. They're just playing covers. So the band's over. We go back into our dressing room. We come out, and and there's maybe 100 people left in this cavernous room that holds 1,000 people.
No.
So that was pretty disappointing. But the guys are going, no, don't worry. But in the meantime, internal politics. The drummer's auntie says to the drummer, your band leader, being me, is ripping you off because you must be making a shitload of money because you're so good and you're playing all these gigs with these big bands that are touring. Well, mediocre, mid-level bands. My bookkeeping wasn't up to scratch, but I had all the records there. Anyway, the bass player says, sack him. I'm sick of him anyway because I want to get funkier, and he just hasn't had. He played big hair band, American West Coast stuff.
Your bass player's saying to you, sack the drummer.
Yeah.
Okay.
He said, you don't need this shit, Geoff. Sack him. But because I'd had a band that fell apart because of a car accident, recorded an album, formed a band to play that album, and here we're kind of at the cusp. We've got management. We think something's going to really happen.
Yeah.
I did my usual role as peacemaker. So I got my books together, put it then, and Jono said, and then at the same time, Hutcho's come and said to Jono, he said, Jono, it doesn't matter, Jono, the bass player, and said, because Jono bought a light show, he said, I can pay you $1,000 a week if you go on tour to play bass and bring your light show. And Jono said, no, but he said to me, I'll hang in there if this deal with these guys, these managers comes out. Because he signed nothing at this point. It was just see how it went. I said, all right. So we went up to their penthouse suite at Runaway Bay for a meeting. And they promised all this stuff they're going to do for us. John says, okay, I'm hanging there. And in the next week, we did a support for the Go-Betweens at the QUT in Queensland. I was working full-time. We drove up there. Go-Betweens, one of my favourite, most influential bands from Australia. And also, say, Lou Reed was the other one from... And Gary, the guitar player, and Jono, they're saying, well, we should hang around for the Go-Betweens and meet them afterwards, I said, I've got to go home. I've got to go to work at 7:30 tomorrow morning. So we didn't. It was a big regret. Lo and behold, the commercial radio station that we put it on had recorded our show, and we heard ourselves played on the radio as we drove home. So again, it's a bit of an ego boost, thinking, oh, something's going to happen. This is all happening. Anyway, the guys at our meeting up at their penthouse suite at Runaway Bay say, look, we've got this deal going with key rings we've imported from China or wherever, and there's a dispute on the wharves, and we've got a container full of key rings stuck on the wharves. They're already sold. When we get them off, we'll be rolling in cash, and off we'll go. So we're all thinking, oh, well, that's promising. Nothing signed yet. A week later, the dispute's over. The key rings are off the docks, but they've only gone with one of the guys who's just took off with the key rings and all the money. So Jono's left, and he's gone on tour, and when he's come back, he's formed a group called the Rock and Ruse, because it was Jono's idea to wear the 60 suits and do a concept band. So that was it for Jono. He pulled the pin. Yeah, they were a pretty successful cabaret band, but they weren't doing anything like what we were doing, which cutting edge 80s music.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, that's a long-winded story. I can go on for ages with this kind of stuff.
So, what do you like? You make a bit of music now, and you perform a bit of music now. Again, with the sort of technology, has it made it you're talking about recording back then? Obviously, that was a much more complicated and costly process to what it is to record now.
Or
you
yes
just
and no.
On a 4-track?
Yes and no. I mean, On my first recording, I basically did it in a friend's 16-track studio in the Valley, who I used to friend who just happened to go that way. I used to hang out with him when we were teenagers and go surfing.
Yep.
He was a drummer too. Used to play with a guy called Mick Hadley in a blues Brisbane band. So we did a single first up when we had this female singer play with for a couple of weeks. And when the band broke up, I thought, well, I'm going to go and do a recording. So we did it pretty quick. I did it with the guitar player who could play everything, and the drummer who hadn't had his car accident, because he had a car accident because he was playing with another band who'd been signed to EMI or whoever.
Yep.
They'd done an album, but had the car accident, and he had deep depression. I don't know where I was going with that. I just go round and round.
The change in
technology. Yeah, well, so that was kind of relatively straightforward. And my second record, I bought an ESQ1, an Sonic ESQ1, which was the state of the art keyboard, and it had an 8-track sequencer on it, and it was 8-note polyphonic, whereas the keyboard before was monophonic Korg thing, which had a sequencer on it. Yep. So at home, I recorded my guitar parts. And I did. So I had 3 tracks to record stuff on, and 1 track was a sync track to the ESQ1, which I played the bass and the keyboard parts on.
Yep.
And then I took that to my mum's studio again and put the guitar and the vocals and overdubs on. That was my second one. So is it easy with digital? Well, in some ways, yes. In other ways, no. If you're an engineer doing sound and you've got tools that do things supposedly easier than the old ways, like cutting tape, well, you use it. But it also makes you lazy.
Non-destructive editing.
It can make you lazy where you don't actually capture one great performance. You might capture several and put them together. Now, they were doing that with tape, the good engineers, no doubt about that. But you can actually end up spending more time because of digitalisation. But having said that, it's certainly opened the world up that anybody can make a recording now. For under $1,000, you can make something that can be played on the radio.
Yeah.
You know, depending on how good your ears are and all that sort of thing.
So that's almost like what we've done is sort of corporatized even the DIY aspect that was around sort of, I guess, in the beginnings of the punk movements and even to a degree the beginnings of the sort of rave party movements where it was all about doing it yourself. And
yeah, I think that's empowered people in a great way, but it's also disempowered or fragmented it, like we were talking earlier on about in the news reporting space. And as you alluded to before, it's difficult to figure out who you're going to listen to because there's still great music around there. There are other things with digital technical issues, like for me, too much digital processing excites the tinnitus in my left ear. That tape never would do, or if I could sit in front of a 24-track tape machine, for 12 and 15 hours and my ears were still working, 2 hours of digital and they're screwed.
Could that also be because you're a bit older?
Oh, absolutely. That's absolutely part of it. But
although I like to admit nothing's because of my age.
It's hard to explain what I'm talking about because it's like you can't trust what you're hearing.
Yeah.
When you learn to mix and listen to each different sound, it does something to my head. So on one hand, it's really great, but on the other hand, it means there's a lot more mediocre crap out there. And as I said before, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
And kind of where this conversation started, I suppose, this music one, was the role that the record companies and the A&R people played and the media getting it out there. Now, there was always going to be crimes and people getting ripped off, and that's still happening. But I was having a chat with a young fellow the other day who plays in a local group here. And I was talking about some of the digital issues that I have with what it does to my hearing. And I was a bit critical of a lot of electronic stuff because so much of it, even at the highest level, use the same sounds, the same breakdowns, the same, I'm not sure the technical words for some of them. But he said something that I thought that was really profound and relevant, and particularly when I think of the history of music and how each new thing that comes up has been dismissed as being vile, violence, inciting hatred, blah, blah, blah. He said, well, if the kids are listening today, that's all that matters.
Sorry, if the
kids are listening to the music,
yeah,
all that stuff you said, Geoff, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Now, you can analyse that further and say, well, that's out of ignorance, but how is that any different to what came before?
Yeah.
It's not, because it was never about knowing, it's about feeling. Now, if that music's eliciting feelings within people and, bringing people together and to share the feeling, well, then it's doing its job. Just because I don't like it doesn't really matter. Just because I perceive it to be lazy doesn't matter. Because there's great experimental hip hop music going on, and rap music, and all the offshoot genres that have come from there on. And look at Ry Cumming. You know Ry Cumming, Ry X.
Yeah. He's
just sold out at Albert Hall.
Okay. Wow.
So from his humble beginnings at Angari, and I put him on at a show back in the 90s that I used to run at the bowling club called Breaking New Ground.
I remember that.
And
did you say the 90s?
90s, yeah.
Oh, okay. I wouldn't remember that then.
And Ry came and played his songs. He was just finished school, or still in year 12 or 17 or so. And they were quite dark songs, but they were really great songs. He was doing a lot of stuff that I wasn't aware of, and he won a few prizes. But anyway, he was discovered, signed up by DreamWorks. He was discovered busking in South American country, starts with C.
Colombia?
No. People go there to surf.
Costa Rica?
That's it, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, he got signed up to DreamWorks, so he went poppy, so explored the poppy side. But things changed for him when he met this fellow. Oh, God, I can't remember his name. And he went back to the darkness, or as he's described critically, melancholic. Okay. And it's electronica, but his voice is ethereal, the way he uses it. He's playing with the London Philharmonic Orchestra.
Okay. Well.
His mum the other day, who was talking to me when I was busking downtown on Saturday night, said he just played to 20,000 people.
Jesus.
He's had a couple of minor plays here, on Triple J, but he's basically been ignored by Australia. But now he's pulling crowds all across Europe, and now starting to pull them in the US. Now the great thing about what Ry did was, I wrote about this some years ago. He made a decision to turn his back on multi-million-dollar offers, recording contracts, to go his own way. That to me, that's inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that is the punk ethos. That is a do-it-yourself ethos.
Well, I think there's a lot of artists around now. Like, I mean, I don't know, really. Are record companies signing anybody that doesn't win a TV show competition for their talent? Like,
I think they must be. I mean, I'd have to go online and analyse that, but the record companies are still moving on. Obviously, they're selling back catalogue, and they're probably selling to the older demographics, and they've got problems with streaming and all that stuff.
Most of the modern artists I've been listening to over the last, handful of years, Rough Trade Records is probably the most commercial sort of, or biggest, and they're still an independent label. They've been around for ages and ages, but...
Yeah, but who owns them? Does someone own them?
I don't think so. But yeah,
I don't know.
Most of the younger bands, they seem to be running everything themselves, it seems.
I think you'll find that they'll team up with major companies for distribution.
Yeah, well, say there's this mob. Well, Flightless Records team up with Rough Trade, and they distribute Rough Trade in Australia, I think.
I'm not really up on all that sort of stuff anymore. So.
It's kind of not relevant, the actual record companies as such.
I'm out of touch with. Obviously, young people go to festivals and they have a great time. My son just went to Splendor in the Grass a couple of weeks ago. Said it was the Best time he's ever had in his life. They know the music. I mean, they're the underground bands like the Chats, for instance.
Yeah, they're great. I played
All
them.
right. Now, their first record, they can't hardly play or sing, but they don't care.
No.
And the people who like their music don't care. I like their music.
Yeah.
Because they don't care, and it's funny.
That pub feed,
pub
I
feed.
think they've got potential to make a lot of money from that, like from sort of if they let somebody who's smart enough to say, yeah, I think we want to use that for a commercial.
Yeah, or they'll just wait for 30 years, and like they did with Iggy Pop songs and or Lemonhead songs.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, I'm playing that Lemonhead song that's off the 4-wheel drive ad now.
I never wanna
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. Yeah, they just put and I find it weird. It's like they don't put out as many singles as what they publish new clips. Like they publish new clip on YouTube, and wow, it's their new song, but they're not releasing it as a single that goes in the alternative singles chart or whatever it might happen to, if that even still exists.
I have no idea. I don't follow that stuff. I just know that I was amused by what they did, and I liked the spirit with which they did it, because it was just, middle fingers all round.
Have you heard of Amyl and the Sniffers?
I have, but I'm not listening to their music.
They're fucking great.
Like some of this music which would have appealed to me when I was
King
younger.
Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard?
Yeah, they're pretty cool. I don't like a lot of what some of they did, but what I do is really appreciate that, because music history just continues to repeat itself. So you can only go back and drink from the same well so many times when you're creating music or listening to it. I guess that's why nostalgia is so strong when people go back and listen to the music they used to love. And of course, with Spotify now, you can go back and listen to all the music you didn't hear.
See, I find that what takes up a lot of my musical time is listening to the music that I missed the first time round. It's like I've discovered all these artists that I wouldn't have given the time of day to in the 80s and the 90s.
Well, some of the...
I don't know if it's because I hear it through good quality sound system compared to hearing it through the AM radio in the car.
I'm often blown away by some of the production from those bands, the obscure ones, and then other times some of the production for the ones that have actually been played in the top 40 back in the 60s when I was listening to it is awful.
Yeah, but that sort of late 80s.
I'm talking about the 60s.
Okay, yeah, but that sort of 80s, late 70s into the 80s, I think, is when they just before things started turning digital, is where they kind of got as good as what they got at using the equipment that they had. That's why so much of that stuff I
don't necessarily agree with that.
Don't you?
But obviously the equipment was expanded, and then there were lots of fashions in the recording world, like particularly the West Coast sound. They tried to deaden the room as much as when I was a student. Skunk Baxter, I think his name was, the NRA. He had his NRA cap on. He come and did a recording session with us and showed us how to get the snare sound they used. He pulled his wallet out of his pocket and stuck it on the snare drum.
Huh, okay, wow.
Then I had... So it was... So there were fashions about how things should be done. And I remember in the early 80s... there was a drum machine invented by an Australian called the Linn drum. That's what I was going to use on my second record, because I just programmed my Yamaha RX-11 to play the drums, which is about the most primitive sampled drum. The samples were actually shorter than what you hear, so you'd have to artificially extend them with some reverb. There was a lot of talk then about how you couldn't get real drums to sound good. And I used to think, what the F are they talking about? I mean, go and have a listen to some of the drum sounds from the 60s. Anyway, the Linn drum almost became ubiquitous. I think I can hear it on a lot of Prince stuff. I listen back to old Prince stuff, and it's like, I didn't realise how mechanical it was. Where's the groove?
Yeah.
It's awful. It's but this was one of the most grooviest guys on the planet using a Linn drum.
I guess
because it was fashionable.
But I guess his groove sort of came from his guitar.
And when I play my 80s album, people say, oh, you must have made that in the 80s. because they can recognise that it's 80s music, even though it didn't use a Lindrum. But I find that there was a fashion in the early 90s to accentuate the 1 kilohertz ring that many snares naturally have, rather than dampening it, which was the standard thing to do before then. So there are fashions in sound,
like that
production.
Phil Collins.
Well, his was the gated reverb sound.
Okay.
All right, so then if you go and listen to some of the Led Zeppelin stuff, some of it so badly recorded you can hear the phasing from the overheads going, but it didn't matter because it suited the music.
Yeah.
But they had that big room sound, and then there's fashions to crush room sounds so that they're just completely crushed by compression, and then add that in afterwards, and a whole bunch of other issues. I'm no expert on all these things, but I'm aware of them. I try them sometimes in my own amateurish way.
Have you seen that? Is it called Studio 301 or something? It's Dave Grohl, and he's buying the desk that's in the studio somewhere in the Hollywood Hills where Fleetwood Mac recorded Rumours.
No, I haven't.
It's a documentary.
I find Dave Grohl's, to me, I find him quite enigmatic, given that he was a member of Nirvana, given that he likes to criticise talent shows. And I've got some theories on those as well, because most people who are trusted musicians are cynical about it. But no, I haven't seen it. Or maybe I have, I don't know. But anyway, now that you've got me onto Dave Grohl and talent shows. Now, as the world changes, I always try and look for parallels, or maybe I just notice them. Now, I like watching singing shows, particularly Australian ones, because the Australian ones are superior to both in talent and production to anything else that I've seen done anywhere else in the world. People should appreciate that. Now, sure, you've got to put up with all the storytelling guff, and that is a big part of how you connect with the artist. That's how they're manipulating you as the viewer. But you can just turn all that crap off and just watch the performance and still be engaged. But while you're a faux judge sitting there in your lounge chair watching these people, you're actually being affected by whatever they bring to those performances. Firstly, because you might have listened to the backstory that they've given you.
Yep.
Or if not, simply because the performance reaches you somehow. So to me, that's where the value is. I mean, I watch television, and I'm not scared to say that I don't care if it's dumb. If it makes me, if it entertains me, however you analyse what is entertainment, if it entertains me, well then, in my mind, that's valid. I don't care if somebody thinks that, some snob thinks that I'm a lowbrow. Also, I like some lowbrow stuff.
I like watching the first couple of episodes of those shows where you get to see all the people that are really bad.
Well, they don't do that anymore.
And think that they're really, really good. Hang on, I'll just pause this.
Stuart, excuse me.
Yeah. Okay. Oh no, actually I have to. Okay, we're back. The magic of electricity. I've gone to the toilet, had a coffee, and it's been 0 seconds in the time that you're listening.
Just like on Star Trek.
Yeah. Now,
By the way, Star Trek, those 2 shows on an afternoon, people could learn a lot about humanity just by watching them.
Next Generation.
Yeah, they're amazing shows. Not all of them, but anyway, I got sidetracked.
Yes.
Because I can give you another hour on that if you want. But okay, talent shows, singing shows.
Yes,
not talent shows, but
funny.
Specifically singing shows.
At the beginning,
we were talking before about
yes.
being sucked in by the stick and everything. But let's strip away all that stuff. There's no doubt that these singers are talented singers. There's no argument there. There's no doubt, if you watch The Voice, that over the period that they improve as a result of their mentorship. So what does that actually mean? They don't all go on to have successful careers, or they don't all become megastars. And some people criticise The Voice and saying, well, it hasn't actually produced anyone yet, whereas Australian Idol has produced several. But in the old days, we had artist and repertoire people. They were called the A&R man, typically. And their job was to go out and find talent. And in the old days of contemporary music, that meant finding the talent, signing it up, and then nurturing it so that they could make millions of dollars. Right. So there is a plethora of stories from some of our greatest artists ever about how the producer, the person employed by the record companies to make a commercial product, to make money from, has compromised the artist. But the artist has to choose to do it. That is no different to what's happening before our eyes, except that the commercial model for a singing show, for instance, while there are outlays which I assume are mostly covered by advertising, they managed to figure out a way to actually sell their performances whilst they're in the show. And so they're actually taking the A&R role, maybe in a microcosm. And sometimes some of those singing artists go on national or international tours with their mentors or the coaches, whatever you want to call them. So that in itself is evidence that there's some genuine stuff going on here at an artistic and commercial level, particularly at an artistic level.
Well, Queen took on that.
Adam Lambert,
yeah. He was a winner of one of those sorts of shows initially, wasn't he?
I said I can't gravitate towards Adam, but yes, exactly right.
So there are some sort of serious
he is a major talent. There's no doubt in my mind that that's the case.
Yeah.
But yes, you're absolutely right. So that's slightly different. But the old A&R model, that person would normally stay with that particular act and nurture them through their career, because the artist needs somebody within the organisation to motivate promotion, because that's part of commercial music. Is you can make the best product, but if the record company doesn't promote it, then it's not going to be a hit. I can't say that categorically, obviously, but in general terms, it won't be a hit because it hasn't been exposed to enough of the marketplace.
But now record companies, though, they're not just competing with each other; they're competing with the viral nature of the way a lot of artists break, like through the internet.
Yeah, look, I haven't given a great deal of thought to that. However, you'd need some data there to kind of understand how that's all happening. But at the coalface, nothing much seems to have changed. We still have radio stations promoting music. We have, luckily, Triple J and a few other offshoots from the ABC in this country. And kids are buying tickets, expensive tickets to go to festivals, which is how a lot of bands expose themselves, and they do a little tour. So that's still fairly traditional, and that's still happening. It hasn't gone away. And sure, the kids have got a different medium about how they discover these things, and that's not something that I really understand or have investigated.
Through doing the radio show that I do, I've discovered that initially we had an email from an independent Sydney artist. Can you play my song? It was sent to me because it was electronic. I was like, yeah, I'll play your song. I sent her a message saying, initially I didn't like your song. Then I started. Then it grew on me, and I've played a few more of her songs as she sent them to me. But she sent me a link to her SoundCloud, and then within that SoundCloud account is people that they follow on SoundCloud. So it's sort of like this real social network of being able to track down music. Okay, here's an artist that I like. Here's the stuff that they like, and then you can like explore the stuff that they like, and then it's like an exponential tree out of all those artists that they like within the handful of those artists that the person that you've come to SoundCloud to listen to for in the first place. Out of all the ones they follow, then there's going to be ones in there that you like, and then you go further into it and you look at the ones that they like, and it sort of keeps them going.
I think that's an avenue, but
and then the YouTube suggestions as well is also.
It still doesn't describe reaching the masses. I don't quite understand how that works yet. I mean, obviously, when bands tour, there's the word of mouth thing that will always remain the same, and of course, it can be magnified through the ease of communicating digitally.
Yep.
But I still can't I don't understand how the cream rises to the top, if you like.
I think
is it still Triple J setting the agenda? I talked about Ry Cumming earlier, or Ry X selling out the Albert Hall.
Yep.
In a concert he's playing in October with the London Philharmonic. His rise is probably happened because he's been touring Europe for years, doing this particular genre of music that he does.
Yep. Well, I think it's largely based on like for me, I consider the position of the band based on their YouTube views. Like for instance, that chats that we were talking about 1 week ago, they published this track Identity Theft. It has 296,000 views. Something that the chats published 1 year ago has 7.6 million views. Now these are a bunch of guys from the sunny coast, I think.
Sunshine Coast.
Yes, yeah. Sunshine Coast, who don't really have much in the terms of a backing. They're with this. I discovered these guys through this label called Piss Fart Records, which I think are out of Melbourne.
I think you've just convinced me in one fell swoop about that phenomenon. I don't need any more enlightenment. It's obvious just by the numbers you read out.
Yeah, I mean, I would put them on a level of a band that I would have maybe gone to see as an 18-plus-year-old, maybe once every now and then playing in a pub in Sydney, you know what I mean? Yet here they are, they've got their tracks out and 7.6 million people have looked at them.
I think we've just stumbled, I should have thought of this, at least just stumbled across what's replaced Rock Australia magazine and the like.
Yeah.
That there is a community, a web set up in that anarchic space of the internet to do exactly what those magazines used to do.
And then they have their Instagram account, which is linked to their YouTube account, so they get their message out through they get the message out about their YouTube through their Instagram, and then vice versa.
I just want to know whether they would have had so many views if the lead singer didn't have that
red
Prince Valiant haircut.
Red hair. I like how he's wearing the
Surf Life.
The Surf Life Saving. Yeah.
Anyway,
sure.
but on the talent shows, I think that they are valuable. Sure, it's pretty mainstream stuff, but there have been incidents of from Australian Idol or X Factor, I'm not sure which one, where the alternate type artists supported by Triple J have come out of that process. So,
little Tash Sultana, I think, is an example of.
I don't know whether she did that.
She went viral on YouTube.
Yeah, but I'm talking about through the TV shows now.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just trying to think who there's two. Lisa Mitchell was the first one, and there was a young fellow who's still getting some play in Triple J. They're the two so-called alternate kind of people, and then there've been the mainstream ones. So it does play a role, and I don't really see any purpose in deriding people with talent. Whether they're entertainers or singer-songwriters, what's the difference? I mean, bands still do covers to break them into the marketplace now. So what's the difference? I mean, this snobbery about playing covers now is kind of gone. But you're meant to interpret them rather than just reproduce them like a tribute band. That's another story.
When I was coming through, it was that you can either go searching for it, or you can have what's packaged and produced and presented to you. I still see that there is that definition, or definition as in defining the two general sorts there's the independent sort of artist, and then there are the packaged artists. It seems like the packaged artists these days are more the creation of television. There's not the. I don't know.
Well,
Who
there's
knows?
a formula.
Like,
I mean, how many videos do you see with producer featuring?
yeah.
So what kind of songwriting is that? You could say, well, the producer made the music,
Yep.
and this person came along and did the
And
melody
performed.
and the words, or the producer might have actually wrote the melody.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily much different to the Rolling Stones or U2, where the lyrics and the melody weren't written; the tracks were already recorded. I mean, the last what's the band that does Blur? Oh, Blur. The last Blur album, sorry, was recorded in a whole bunch of jams in Japan, if I remember correctly. There was no songs or lyrics; they were just jams.
Yeah. Right.
Then they were taken back, and an engineer producer selected the bits out, and then vocals were put on. In fact, that's how Let It Be was made.
Okay.
The last Beatles album. It was just a bunch of shambolic jams, and I can't remember. It might have been Geoff Emerick, I think. The engineer was asked to try and find a record in there,
Okay.
and he went in there and cut everything up and made the record, and then it was given to Phil Spector to produce.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, that's right. Because
But there's
the strings and the no strings version of that.
A lot of those songs didn't have lyrics or melody. They were written after.
Yeah. Okay. Oh wow.
And of course, in 2009 or 10, they re-released that without Phil Spector's production.
Yeah.
How it was recorded.
Yeah. Without
Like Along and Winding Road, for instance, with all the string stuff. Paul McCartney hated that
Yeah.
when it came out, but it turned out to be one of his most recognised tunes.
Yeah.
So there's stuff that's happened in the music industry when you go and start reading about, the bios, the stuff written about those days. It never ceases to amaze me how corrupt it was. It probably still is.
Yeah.
The Standover Man, and all the other things, the dysfunction, the artistic dysfunction, but they all made it into something. And that, I always kind of think, well, without all those dynamics, without all those things, what would happen? I mean, Elvis Costello, for instance, was a complete arsehole, and he shopped his stuff around everywhere until he found Jake Riviera at Stiff Records, He gave him a go. Who knows that the first Elvis Costello record, the one that broke him, My Aim Is True, didn't have the Attractions on it. He recorded it with session musos in Nashville and released it as a new wave record.
Okay. Well, back to Dave Grohl. That's that first Foo Fighters album. He recorded every single bit of that.
Yeah, but I think that's different because, I mean...
it was only when he came to tour it that he got Pat playing guitar.
I could say that about my first record too, for that matter, because I didn't have a band. I just had one side person that I worked with, and we produced it with ourselves, with the engineers. So, but he could play all the instruments.
I think that's going to be something that we're going to see heaps more producers putting together music.
Well, my last 3 demos, there's no other musician other than I, and I'm no great stick as a musician, but I can make something that sounds pretty good, I think. Anyway, I go back to that dynamic in the music business where dysfunction had to be managed, like for whatever reason, and yet magic was made.
Yeah,
somehow amongst all the dysfunction, and it seems to be a universal.
Fleetwood Mac rumours personified. There was a band that was just completely and utterly falling apart and coke bloody sodden.
I don't think there should ever be relationships in bands. Personally, personal relationships are always fraught. They cause all kinds of problems. I mean, anybody who's in love with somebody else, they're going to have disagreements, and you don't stop being in love or stop having disagreements because you're in the room with the rest of the band, because they're separate. Even though the band is like a marriage, a good one, then you've got this sub-dynamic, and that makes everybody uncomfortable because the other people don't know, well, how am I supposed to react to that? Am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to step over the line? The Go-Betweens was a good example.
Yeah, big time.
But when I saw the Go-Betweens play one of their last gigs supporting R.E.M. or Billy Bragg, whichever one it was, they put on the best show I'd ever seen, and they hated each other at that point.
I don't think I've seen a band. I don't think I've seen a band that hated each other. I guess I saw what was meant to be Jane's Addiction's like the first time Jane's Addiction broke up. I saw their last show, and it was tacked onto the end of a tour because they had to postpone it when it was originally.
I have to tell you a story then.
And those guys didn't seem like they got on, but the concert was pretty great. I saw Radio Birdman play a few years ago at Byron Bay, and they just looked like four dudes that did not enjoy what they were doing at all. They looked like they were over it. But
well,
they're still.
I know other people who loved it. Not necessarily Byron Bay on the Gold Coast. You saw it.
Oh, look, I've seen them a few times since they reformed, but the last time that I saw them play, they just didn't seem into it. But and I didn't think they would do it anymore, to be honest. But they've kept on doing it. So
I think I just saw them one day on GTK when Ray Burgess was hosting it, and there was some grainy footage from Paddington Town Hall. I was like, wow, who are these men with golden helmets? But look, I have to tell you a story about dysfunction. The most egotistical musicians I've ever met have all been in covers bands, without exception. I have not met too many egotists who weren't. I have met a few, but nearly without exception. And this was interesting. I was doing some sound for a band in 1985, and we did a gig at the Beach Hotel, the old Beach Hotel, when it still had a motel there, at Byron. We're in the room, getting ready to go on, and the next thing you know, the bass player and the lead guitarist are having a punch-up. I thought, what's going on here? They were arguing about getting the lead break right. The bass player's saying it's got to be exact. The lead guitarist saying, well, what's it matter? They went on and played. They just laughed it off. 3 nights later, we're playing a gig in Queen Street in Brisbane. They're punching out again. Still laughed it off the next day. Go figure. Now, that's not about being egotist. It's about, I don't know what it's about, but I've experienced this because I've never played in a covers band till recently.
But if not one of those people involved in that clash have a real personal investment in the music, like it's their song that they wrote or something like that, then at the end of the day, it's easy to move on because you're just disagreeing
yeah, it is,
on
but I mean,
something that neither of you are particularly precious about.
I've done support gigs for house bands who are covers bands who do things like, well, specifically, I've got a friend doing front of house who doesn't really know anything about sound, just push the sliders up and down, and the guy says, I'll fix the compressor up, don't touch it or I'll kill you. So it sounds like shit. Or halfway through a gig and the guy that's got the side, doing the side fill puts his something, says, just after he's turned the sound off for fallback. That's the kind of egotists I'm talking about. It's like they just want to undermine other people for their own amusement. And I don't know if that's so prominent these days, because, I mean, back in the 80s, there were a lot of meatheads getting around. Sound engineers in particular still are, I think, very insecure people. Probably because they got the most criticism. Because the band lives or dies at their hand.
Damned when you do and you're damned when you don't. Like somebody's going to take exception no matter what your move is. Well, I don't know how you're going, but I think it's time that we should maybe think about pulling the pin. Geoff, what do you reckon?
Well, I could probably advise, if you suffer from insomnia, that you should have a listen to this podcast whenever that problem arises, and you'll be asleep in no time. Thanks for listening to my rambling.
I've been trying to get Geoff to do this for months, at least 6 months, so I'm stoked that I've been able to finally corner you.
Yeah, well, next time we can talk about the history of the world and how everything that exists is come from our human's imagination. There is nothing in the world that exists that wasn't imagined.
The most destructive of those things, the fact that we imagine that all these different masses of land are countries.
Perhaps, but it's more complex than that, obviously. It's a bit of a sobering thing to think of from ideological perspective or political perspective or humanist perspective, that all the things that we have invented to keep us under control, to civilise us, to conform, that's all been done theoretically so that we don't kill each other, although that's still happening. I do fear now that the idea of humanism is being replaced with consumerism, capitalism. We have name-calling at a great level where we have powerful right-wing elites who actually do.
This is Stu, back in the day with Geoff, and Geoff's journalist, musician. Geoff and Iggy is actually here. Geoff's dog, Iggy Pup. How's it going, Geoff?
I'm good, Stu. How are you, mate?
Yeah, not too bad. And how's it going, Iggy Pup? Chomp, chomp, chomp down there on his leg.
Yeah, she's trying to lead up.
Her lead.
She wants freedom.
Okay, so Geoff's a journalist, a regional, small, independent publication, weekly. I don't know. We might as well start there. Like, how long have you been doing that for?
I work for a small independent newspaper where I've basically been given a bit of free rein to do what I do.
And how long's that been going on for?
15 years. I've been working here now, and it's an interesting position to hold.
So, over the course of that 15 years, how have the sort of dynamics of the way that you do your job changed